I would like to introduce Janna Gillis. She works for the Center of Excellence for Mental Health and is a family outreach and mental health consultant. Hi, Janna.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, guys, for being here this evening. You know, we're 45 or so and counting. And, you know, one thing I know for sure is that this is not necessarily an easy topic for us to address. But at the same time, as we're approaching, 50 parents coming in to speak or to see this webinar this evening, it tells me that this really is an important topic for us to be discussing this evening. So I really thank you for being here and taking time on this snowy February night at bedtime for many of us, for our kids, to be here and to listen to this. This topic has become quite a passion of mine. And, over the years, I've come to realize that this is completely part of the human condition. Life and loss and life and death, they don't exist separately from one another. They very much, are tied together. And my hope tonight is that I'll get to share some information with you and engage in a conversation about how our children navigate loss and the grief that follows, and also to open up a dialogue and just sort of share ways that we can support our children and support ourselves when it comes to experiencing, this inevitable part of life. So really briefly, we're going to talk about both death and non-death loss tonight. There's a lot of similarities and overlap, and there are some differences. We're also going to discuss our own experiences and our own reactions to loss and death, and how that sort of colors the way in which we approach this topic. As well, for us to be talking about how children respond to this topic, we need to sort of understand where they're coming from in terms of a developmental perspective. So we'll take a few minutes to go over that. And of course, we want to spend time really looking at concrete ways that we can support our children and ourselves, and to touch on when we may need to sort of look outside of our own selves as parents to seek support, for our children and ourselves. And of course, I want to leave time at the end and throughout for us to be able to, for you to be able to ask questions and have them answered. So that's sort of how we'll tackle this evening in our time together. I love this quote. Okay, some things in life cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. And for those of us who've experienced loss and grief, which I'm not sure that there's any one of us on this call who hasn't in some fashion. We know this to be true. Okay, we know that this is not something that anyone around us can fix. It's not about fixing it. It's really about our ability to carry this and carry it within ourselves, and to come alongside of somebody else who may need our help, for it to be carried. And oftentimes this notion of fixing, although it's well-intended, it can often sort of miss the mark, right? So we're going to focus not so much on fixing and more about how we walk alongside someone, and in this case, our children. So what is grief? What are we talking about when we talk about grief? Well, simply put, it is really our natural and adaptive response to loss. And I say this because, as I mentioned, sometimes this idea and this need to sort of fix this state, or to try to remedy it, or hurry it along, or pathologize it in some way. There's times where we really do see this as a problem and something that we want to sort of hide from or run away from, and that makes sense. But as I mentioned, it is part of our human experience, and we grieve as an expression. We grieve because we love, and because people and experiences that we lose are important and they're significant to us. So grief is really a way to express this process of loss, and eventually, and hopefully with time and through this process, we're able to make meaning out of our experience and to adjust to life with this new absence. And it really taps into all elements of our human experience. Okay, so it is about how we respond socially and emotionally, how we respond to a loss through our thinking and our behavior, as well as the spiritual dimensions that we bring with us as humans. So I just want to take some time sort of define and talk about non-death loss or living loss, because when we think about grief, we tend to automatically think that someone has died. And of course, that is part of it. But, what happens if our hopes or our dreams die? What happens if our sense of safety and security and normalcy is taken from us? So as I mentioned, grief is this adaptive way in which we respond to different types of losses, and it's not limited to death loss. And we call this non-death loss or living losses. Even though no one has died in these circumstances, these losses can still be really, really significant. And I don't have to tell anybody on this call that, the lives we've been living in the last year have been full of losses, of various types. And these can be really difficult, living losses, and they can be really devastating. And when they happen, they really challenge our assumptions of how the world has been working and how the world should be working, which can be quite destabilizing for us. If we take COVID for an example, for some of us, it's really created a sense of, a loss of a sense of safety and security in our world, and a loss of seeing and coming together with loved ones. And how do we make sense of this? We've been trying to make sense of this for about a year now. And, when we do this and we have to sort of reconstruct this meaning, that's part of the grieving process. For me personally, my father and my grandmothers are living, but I haven't seen them, since August of 2019. And this is something I have 100% absolutely grieved over this past year. And, my assumptions have been challenged. My assumptions have been that though I live far away from my family, when I need them and I need to be near them, I can make that happen. It's not always super easy, but I can make that happen. And that's no longer the case right now. So this has been a real shift we've had to make in our world right now. And it might sound silly to some people, but you can be sure that, our senior high school students of last year and most likely this year are going to grieve and have grieved, losses like these rituals of graduations and proms. And again, it might sound silly to someone, but these are very meaningful to individuals and something that is a significant loss. But loss extends beyond that. Outside of COVID, there's multiple examples of living loss, right? So, it could be, the loss of a job. It could be the loss of our health, okay? As I mentioned, this loss of physical contact with people. When we have a major relocation or a major move, that can bring about a lot of change in our lives that we have to sort of grieve and take time to do so. The loss of a child that we never got to have. These are all important and significant losses in our lives. And it can be very painful and very difficult. And it's not about comparing loss, but for some people, these losses are just as difficult and devastating as a death loss can be. So the bottom line really is that grieving living losses, we do that in the same way in which we grieve death losses. And so when we think about grief, I want us just to, not always kind of classify it in this category of death loss. That we do require this natural reaction, this ability to go through and work through our loss. And I say that also because society is sort of, we tend to understand grief more so through a death loss, and we're not always given the permission, to feel and to grieve these losses, in the way that we need to. And just a caveat about, why we combine these two, tonight, combining death loss and living loss is that, we grieve when we lose something important to us, regardless of what it is. Okay, so similarly, the way that we're going to support our children, regardless of the loss that they are, experiencing, our mechanism is the same. It's very similar, regardless of what the loss is. So, as we know, talking about death and loss, it's not necessarily an easy thing for us to do. And, as a society, we have a pretty funny relationship with death and loss. On the one hand, it's sort of seen as this taboo topic, something that we're not really encouraged, to talk about so much. But on the other hand, we have this fascination and this attraction, to death and loss. And we see it everywhere in our culture. Just turn on your news feed or look at your phone, and look at the movies that we watch and the shows that we engage in, our children included. I don't know if anyone's watched any Disney movies lately, but you'd be hard pressed to find one that doesn't, include, the death of a parent, for example. Obviously, we see it in our music. Songs are filled with, lyrics about heartbreak and loss. So on the one hand, it's very much present around us. But on the other hand, it's also kind of hidden away and sort of largely removed from our direct sort of everyday experiences. And that's partly because we've evolved as a society, and we live longer, and we're not as closely connected to actual death experiences as we may have been 100 years ago. And for many of us, we probably just tend to ignore this topic until perhaps we're faced with it. And why do we do that? Well, not probably, I think we are the only, creatures on this planet who have this sort of unique knowledge that we are only here for a certain amount of time, and that eventually we will no longer cease to exist. And that when we experience losses, either, of an individual or of an experience, they're painful and they're hard. And that's a lot to carry around. That knowledge that this is how things play out for us. Okay, so that consciousness plays a part of it. So do our lived experiences. What we've lived, what we're living currently, and what we've lived in our past in terms of death and non-death loss, really shape the way that we approach this topic. As well as our cultural and our religious experiences. And for some of us, those experiences help us to sort of lean into this topic. And for others, it maybe has led us to keep an arm's length. And that's understandable. We also, and I hear this a lot in schools actually, and Gerry and I have had this conversation many times, that there also seems to be this sense of uncertainty around how we should be or shouldn't be, responding to these experiences. A lot of times we hear things like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, I'm afraid to say something wrong, I'm afraid to make things worse. So in that case, I think I'm just going to leave it be. And again, that makes sense if we're not feeling sort of confident and secure in our ability to do that. But I have a lot more confidence in people that we actually, more likely than not, and most times, we actually do know if we allow ourselves to sort of take that step. So I want to take a few minutes and just talk about how children, how they view and how they think about death and loss, and understanding. Sorry, I'm just going to move my little box here so I can see my slides a bit better. Understanding the meaning of death, it changes, and loss, it changes as children grow and develop. And, that makes sense, I think, to a lot of people, right? A 2-year-old doesn't see death and loss in the same way that a 7-year-old does, or an 11-year-old or a 16-year-old, okay? So, and when I say developmentally appropriate, I'll use that term, that we want to be developmentally appropriate with children. What that really refers to is a child's maturity of thinking, okay? So that includes their ability to reason and their ability to sort of process information. So we want to just be sure that when we are speaking with children, that we are matching, that developmental stage, and that we're responding in a way that makes sense to them. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So let's just talk quickly about what that can look like at different stages. So infants, in a way, I think, infants maybe kind of have it the best in some sense. They really have no concept of death, obviously. They don't have the cognitive ability. They certainly don't have, the language to be able to think about death in the way we do. They don't know that they've yet to meet their grandparents. They don't know that they've yet to meet their extended family and their cousins, but don't be fooled by these sweet little squishy bundles, okay? Because they are incredibly impacted by their environment, okay? And they react to separation. Heaven forbid an infant were to lose a primary caregiver, like a parent they're going to react to that separation. They don't know why, they can't put words to that. Okay, but they also will react to the emotions of others. So if we're going through a difficult time because we've experienced a loss, they're going to pick up on that emotion, you know, and they're very sensitive to changes in routine and structure. So it's important that despite whatever a family is going through or whatever, you know, has transpired, that we try to keep that routine and structure in place as much as possible. And of course, we know how babies respond when they're feeling, you know, confusion, or, you know, if they're frightened or they're scared, they're, you know, they're going to cry, they're going to be irritable, they're going to be clingy. But babies are also really resilient, and they have the ability to still feel happiness and to bond with many types of, you know, caregivers. So they're resilient little guys. When we look at toddlers, and again, I should make a caveat here. You know, I'm giving you sort of an age frame when I'm going through these slides, but obviously children go through and develop at their own rate and at different times. So, you know, don't get too fixated on the ages that I'm referring to here, because, you know, this is a progression. These developmental stages build on one another. And not all children will meet these developmental stages due to their own, you know, their own abilities, and others will move more quickly through them. So if you're thinking like, well, that doesn't really sound like my 3-year-old, they seem more advanced than that, or they're not quite there yet, that's perfectly normal. You know, development has that continuum. So this is sort of generally speaking. Toddlers, they don't have an understanding that death is permanent. Okay, to them it's very much temporary, it's reversible. For some, it's not necessarily even playing into their sort of schemas of the world yet, but for some it is. And with their newfound, you know, language and cognitive skills, they are starting to explore this topic. And like younger babies, you know, they are also going to respond to sadness, fear, and confusion from caregivers, and even from themselves. If suddenly, you know, they're used to having grandma and grandpa be their primary caregiver, and they're no longer present, whether it's due to COVID type conditions or, you know, unfortunately a death loss, then they're going to be wondering where they are, and they're going to be asking questions. And they may show regression in abilities that they have previously achieved, you know, around perhaps bedtime or eating, or your ability to sort of be autonomous around those tasks. You may see them sort of reverting back to, you know, a stage that they'd already accomplished. Okay, again, very sensitive to change and routine. We want to be able to keep that as structured as possible, but also know that even in the face of hardship, even in the face of loss, children at this age are very much able to be happy and immersed in their play, and sort of, you know, move back and forth between this. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in a little bit. Preschoolers, these guys, I love this age for so many reasons. You know, they're really becoming quite curious about death and loss at this age. They may want to start to sort of talk about death. They're starting to understand finality, but they don't necessarily connect that to their own inner world. Okay, so you might be outside on a walk with your child, and they see a squished bug, or they see a dead bird, and they might seem to understand that that animal or that insect is gone and it's not going to come back, but they don't necessarily internalize that to their personal world. Okay, it doesn't transfer to them. And at this age too, death starts to really enter into their thoughts, and so therefore enters into their play and a lot of their questioning. And this can be kind of off-putting to parents. I know it was to me. I'm a mother of 3 kids, and I know when my children, they're 10, 8, and almost 6, when they were really little and death started entering into their play, I felt like, where is this coming from? You know, we're not experiencing this right now. But as I mentioned, it really is all around us, and play is the work of kids. That's how they explore the world. That's how they make sense of things. So, you know, don't be alarmed if this is something that your children engage in. It's really a natural way to explore this concept. And again, in the face of loss and death, you know, they can possibly show regression as well. And they're going to express, sadness and anxiety and confusion and irritability, all those things that, are natural emotions that kids are going to go through. And they're starting to see that death is something that adults react strongly to. Okay, they're starting to pick up on our reactions, and they're making that link that, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of a serious thing for adults. I'm going to take note of that. Another interesting thing at this age is the concept of magical thinking. Okay, and this is because children at this age are very egocentric, right? They really kind of think about themselves first and foremost, and that makes sense in terms of their development. So therefore, they can make these leaps and conclusions that somehow their actions or their thinking may have played a role in the outcomes that they're experiencing. So, in the context of COVID, it might be that, this thinking that if I would just wash my hands more frequently, maybe COVID would go away. Or if I would have listened better or cleaned my room or ate my supper, then, that person wouldn't have died. And of course, that's not true, but that's the way their brains work at this stage of development. And they have a lot of questions, these guys, and oftentimes if they do experience a loss, they're going to notice that, and they're going to be wanting to know where a person is, and the slew of questions are going to unfold from there typically. School-age children, I know this is a large age range that I'm displaying to you now, but it's sort of between these years that children start to struggle with these more mature concepts of death. Okay, so they're starting to actually understand that death is universal, meaning every living thing eventually will die, that it's inevitable, that this is going to happen at some point in time, and when it does, it's irreversible. And this is a really interesting age I have found. My 5, almost 6-year-old, I feel, is very much in this stage right now. And this newfound information, this newfound knowledge and maturity around these concepts kind of is freaking her out a little bit. Okay, she's a bit agitated and worried. And that makes a lot of sense. If you think about it, we understand these concepts and we're not always very comfortable with them. So imagine when you learn about them and they come sort of clearer for you for the first time. And then if your child is faced with a significant loss or a death, then that can also translate into, this becoming much more real, and that worry for family and friends can ensue. And of course, children express their sadness around these losses, and they'll express their anxiety and show confusion and irritability. But the neat thing about kids is that they don't have a high tolerance for emotional pain. Okay, not like us, where we can stay in it, we kind of can stay in our heads, and it can be very unrelenting. For children, they jump in and out of it. Okay, they don't have the capacity to stay in that all the time. So they're in it, and they're very much in it. And then all of a sudden they can go off, and play and do the normal things that kids do. And that can confuse us a little bit sometimes. And I think that's why, in the past, we used to think, that kids didn't grieve because they didn't grieve like us. But of course they grieve. They just grieve differently. And that really is something that I try to sort of shed a light on, because it can be confusing when suddenly, well, wait a minute, they seem fine and now they're not. And that's the natural way in which they sort of process what they're living. And those struggles that we may see, when we think about this sadness and anxiety and confusion and the way that it can present itself, as you can see on this slide, in terms of, milestones or tasks that they've been, sort of okay with, can become difficult at times. And they can seem to have a decrease in energy or a loss of appetite, and they'll flow between this at times. And there might be a period of time where it's more intense than others. And that's to be expected, especially if the loss, or the death is really significant to them as well. Adolescence. So, again, another really interesting developmental stage, because at this point in time, adolescents really do understand death the way that adults do. Okay, that's pretty solidified. They really have a good understanding. And because they really do have great abstract thought, their questionings now are perhaps more existential. What is the purpose of life? What happens, after death? But something to keep in mind for those of us who have adolescents is that they are still going to be guided by their developmental tasks. Okay, so what is it that adolescents seek at this stage of development? Well, they seek separation from their parents and closeness with others, and that's often their peer group. And honestly, we can expect that to remain the task that they're going to continue to, explore, even in the face of loss. And that doesn't mean that parents aren't important, and that doesn't mean that they don't need us. It just means that they are still adolescents, even though they're facing what they're facing. We maybe need to be mindful of that and find our ways to come alongside, but understand that this is still an important task that they're going to seek out. They too experience strong emotions and will react very much the way that we do as adults. When we're grieving, it's difficult to focus. It's difficult, to have high levels of energy. Our sleep can be disrupted, our appetite can be disrupted. And these are normal and expected things for us to see in our adolescence. So what do our children need from us? Well, they need a lot of things from us. And I really do believe that as parents, we're really well placed to provide to them what it is they need. And we do have this natural desire to protect our children from this topic. Particularly in our culture, we can see it as somewhat of a threat to their innocence. And some believe that if we kind of avoid this discussion and we avoid this exposure, then we can keep them from this sort of harsh and disturbing reality. But children are really, really curious beings, as we've mentioned before. And if their questions are not answered or they're excluded from these experiences, they will make up their own sort of minds and fill in the blanks for themselves. And we don't want them doing that, because when they do that, oftentimes that reality is a whole lot more scary than what it is that we as parents can provide to them. So they're going to naturally ask those questions. And when they ask them, what they're really asking is, tell me what I need to know in a way that I can understand. And please keep me safe and secure while you're doing that. And if we can keep those things in mind, but in order to do that, we also have to be mindful of our own reactions. When children seek to understand, we want to do our best to put our discomfort aside and to meet them where they're at. That's not easy. We have anxieties and fears about this topic at times, and it's understandable. But just to be mindful that sometimes that can inhibit our ability to sort of have these open and honest discussions with our kids. And a word on euphemisms. So I say name it. I encourage you to use the terms death, died, dead, dying. And I know why we use euphemisms. It's these words sound harsh and they sound, sharp and maybe even insensitive. But euphemisms are very abstract, and especially young kids, they need us to be concrete. They can be really confusing. Some of the euphemisms we use, passed away, what does that really mean to a child? When if I ask my kid about pass you what? Pass you the salt, pass the soccer ball, did I pass my test? They can be confusing. So we want to be able to use these words as much as possible, because by not saying these words, death, died, dead, dying, it speaks maybe to something louder, okay, that's not being mentioned, something that maybe we really shouldn't be talking about, or that it's a bad word, or it can sort of perpetuate this sense of it being a taboo topic and tell kids that we're really not very open to this, which we don't want to do because of their natural ability to want to know about the world. And when we're engaging in conversation, kids just want simple, truthful, developmentally appropriate responses. And I know that might be simplifying things, but sometimes I think we just don't need to complicate it and we don't need to overthink it. We just want to answer truthfully, because half-truths or, when children feel like we're not being truthful, they pick up on that. And again, they're going to fill in the blanks on their own. And we don't want them doing that. But in order to do that, we have to listen really carefully to what our kids are saying and asking, and sometimes what they're not saying and what they're not asking. And sometimes we need to be proactive, and maybe start the conversation. But in the end, it really is about trying to meet them where they're at and letting them sort of lead the way and for us to follow them. We also want to capitalize on teachable moments, okay, and take advantage of this. You know, I don't think it's a great idea to wait until we're really faced with a significant loss, be it a living loss or a death loss, to sort of tackle this conversation, nor do we need to sort of sit down and call a family meeting and say it's time that we talk about this. You know, there's lots of real tangible, teachable moments. I mean, you think about even COVID right now in terms of the losses we've experienced. Our kids are asking a lot of questions. I know my kids are, you know, and trying to answer them truthfully. And sometimes the truthful answer is we don't know. But when we know, or when things change, we're going to let you know. You know, teachable moments can also be, I use the example of sort of, you know, dead animals, and it might sound kind of gruesome, but if you're out for a family walk and you sort of come upon a dead squirrel, a child's natural instinct is to perhaps go towards it. And our instinct as a parent is to say like, oh, get away, that's gross. But what if we didn't do that? You know, what if we let them approach it? And what if we came alongside them? And no doubt they're going to have questions. You know, why doesn't he have any eyes? Well, that can be a great discussion about, you know, decomposition in a way that a child can understand. And that's really what they want in the end. Of course, we want to be able to support them to express their feelings. These are big feelings that kids are having, that we have. Imagine what it's like for children. And sometimes that might be about asking questions that allow them to sort of get a bit more granular about what it is that's bothering them. You know, if your child's having a lot of fears or worries, sometimes trying to get down into the nitty gritty about what they're really worried about. I had a conversation like that with my daughter just the other day, and I won't go into it in terms of time, but I realized I needed to ask some more specific questions to help understand what she was really thinking and feeling, and helping her to label that and to normalize what's happening. You know, again, these are big feelings, and we want to be able to help children to see that it's okay to be feeling these. And in fact, we feel them too, and we want to be able to expose our children to our own, you know, adult grief behaviors. We don't want to scare our kids. You know, if we're really distraught and overwhelmed in a big way, that can be scary. But it's okay for our kids to see us sad. It's okay for them to see us crying. It shows us that this is part of human nature, and that we can support one another in these times. And of course, we want to be patient. Grief doesn't follow any specific timeline. You know, it's really unique to the individual. And kids will come back to their grief as they mature through developmental stages. You know, if a child has had a significant loss at the age of 6, it means a certain thing at 6, but it's going to mean something else when they're 12. Okay, so they might come back and revisit that over time. And that's really normal. You know, I've had people say, but oh God, I thought they were over that. Like, why is it coming up now? Well, it's coming up now because it's graduation time and maybe their dad's not with them. And this means something different to them than it did perhaps when they were 4. Okay, so we just want to continue to give, you know, consistent and attuned support to our kids in the way that we do throughout their lives. And this really, you know, is no different. And we want to maintain that sense of safety and security and love. You know, even in times of uncertainty, this is our job as parents, and we do a really good job of that. And it's not about being Pollyanna about things or not telling, you know, the truth, but finding ways for our kids to see and feel that that stable base that we have created through all these years, it still exists, even in these most difficult times. I want to speak really briefly. You know, I've been talking a lot about how this is a very normal process. It's a healthy, adaptive process when we grieve, and that's very much true. But we also have to acknowledge that for some of us, it can get really difficult. And all these sort of symptoms or grief reactions are normal and part of normal grief. But there's a point in time when it extends, you know, beyond a long period of time, you know, or our child is really not doing what we call a puddle jumping. They're not going in and out of this grief. They're not just having these moments of sadness and sort of being functional again and moving on to be normal kid things. They're getting stuck in it, you know, and they're really not themselves. And they're having a hard time sort of motivating themselves around the things that typically would bring them joy or have them engaged. So if they're withdrawing from family and friends, I have a snowplow going by, sorry for the loudness. You know, if those changes to sleep and loss of appetite really become very persistent and they're not able to carry on as they typically would, that might be a sign that we want to sort of reach out outside of our own homes and find some support for our family. And certainly if your child is having, suicidal thoughts or actions, or there's really dramatic changes in their personalities, and they're not really able to, come in and out of this grief response, that's a sign that perhaps we want to involve some mental health professionals. And of course, we want to be taking care of ourselves. We can't really talk about taking care of our kids without talking about ourselves. And our first impulse, of course, as parents, is to protect our children, and that's what we do. But it's crucial that we seek support for our own grief, because oftentimes when our child is experiencing a loss, it's because we're experiencing it as well. And one of the best ways to sort of make sure we're able to support our children is to support ourselves. And there really is lots of research showing that how well a child does after a significant loss is quite dependent on how well the adults in their lives are doing. And I know that might sound like a lot of pressure, but I hope it just encourages us to make sure that we, are, finding activities and people and supports that bring us comfort and allow us to sort of, spend that time on ourselves as needed. And one last message, about taking care of ourselves and support is, we can reach out to your kids' schools, and they really are a place in which resources can be found, or we can be redirected to the appropriate places, whether a school is able to provide that direct support themselves. All of our schools have mental health professionals that do know what's available in our communities and can lead us and direct us in the right way. So just a few takeaway messages. We protect our children by affording them the opportunity to learn, to understand, and to tap into their sources of support and their personal strength. And I really do recognize that this is not easy stuff, but I trust in yourself, that you really are in the best position to come alongside your child in these times. And you're also the best person to know when your child needs something more, or alongside of what you're able to provide. These are just some resources, and Ben, I think you had mentioned that perhaps you could throw them into the chat, and that way if people are curious to explore some of these resources, they can kind of open them right now on their browsers and they have them. These are, the first three are really Montreal-based resources, but they also have a lot of good information, and a lot of resources are online now, which actually makes them much more accessible. There's also just information that's available that can sort of expand on what we were talking about tonight. And I just quickly, a place like Myers Kids Foundation, they run a summer camp every year, a free weekend summer camp for bereaved children. And it really is a wonderful and beautiful organization who's really doing great work, as are the others, on this list. So please reach out and tap into these resources and check them out. I'm going to give the final word to Charlie Brown and Snoopy. And as they look out over the water, sort of contemplating life, Charlie Brown says, "We only live once, Snoopy." And Snoopy says, "Wrong. We only die once. We live every day." And I love this, and it rings really true to me, even in the face of hardship, in the face of loss and death, is life. In the midst of all that is life, and we are living it, and it's good, and it's bad, and it's ugly, and it's beauty. And I do think that there is beauty in our suffering, and it's all part of it. And when we live in this knowledge, I think it helps us to sort of truly live our lives as our best selves, even in the throes of grief, and our best selves to others, particularly our children. So thank you, and we will take some time to answer any questions that may have come up.
Great, thank you very much, Janna. Thank you for the overview. Thank you for, raising awareness for parents about how to support children through difficult times, which is so important. Parents, family members love their children so much, and they want to be able to support them. But I also think part of being a parent is helping them to pass through difficult times in appropriate ways so that they could also be healthy adults and adolescents. So thank you very much for sharing.
You're welcome.
So we received a number of questions when people registered as well. I see a few questions coming up. So I thought we'd just move through some of them, and I invite you to respond. I also invite you to also say if this is a bigger topic that there might be other resources to go to or people at schools that they might want to contact.
Yeah.
So a first question I wanted to start off with is, well, it basically starts with, my wife has a terminal illness, breast cancer, stage 4 breast cancer. And I would like to see how we can ensure that our 14-year-old son is supported through the illness and the possible loss. So, I see that question as a preemptive support. What are some of the ways you can speak to a child about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a really challenging situation for any family to be in. I think when it comes to such a severe illness and such a significant potential of a loss, I think some of the things we were talking about in our presentation about sort of being truthful about circumstances and being able to have conversations with our children that allow us to sort of have these open lines of communication. And I have no doubt that this parent who's asked this question, is doing that. And that sort of taps into the, when we're not sort of openly sharing. And I'm not implying that that's not happening, but just that notion that kids tend to fill in the blanks, or they tend to notice things that we think they may not be noticing. But that's a big topic, and that's a big, it's something really big to be tackling on our own, and I think some of the resources that I provided there, as well as, I don't know where this individual is situated right now, but there are great community resources that can be supportive in terms of how do you go about having these conversations with your child if you haven't yet. And if you did, no doubt support is needed at this time to sort of process what we're living and what we're experiencing. And I just encourage this individual to reach out and not feel that they have to tackle this all on their own, because as I mentioned, children aren't experiencing this in isolation, you're experiencing this as an entire family. And there are good resources and supports out there. So, we can certainly help you to sort of connect with those resources. Want to make sure that makes sense and is available, to this individual. So we can certainly help to do that.
On that topic, I guess I'm wondering, this is a very difficult question to ask, but for the parent who might be in terminal stages of illness, is there something around what they say or can speak to the child about?
The individual who has the illness.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, the literature really does, and I don't want to get research based when we're having these conversations, but it's a relatively new topic, this idea that we can talk to children about these tough things. But it's really a very individual and personal decision, the way in which people want to respond. So there's no right or wrong, it really does depend on how people are situated and their own comfort level. It's certainly encouraged that we can be able to have these open communications, but let's be honest, this is really hard stuff, right? We're not talking about, just talking about, when will we get to see our friends again? These are big topics. And there are resources available for people who are experiencing illness to explore how they would like to or not to communicate this information to their loved ones.
Thank you. Here's a question that came up a few times. Do children with special needs go through the grief process in the same way? Do you have any resources to help those with autism or other special needs go through the grieving process?
That's a really good question. And I'll be very honest that I don't work so directly with children with special needs. However, when we think about developmental stages. Okay, all children fit into developmental stages of some capacity. So I'm not sure where this individual child lies. If we look back, it's sort of, I know they were ranked by age, but it's really about developmental ability. So I would encourage this person to sort of look back at what we were discussing and to see, where does this child fit into the developmental stages, and how can we have conversations that make sense to them, and have conversations, I say that, and actually I worked at a high school where I was sort of tasked with helping a family disclose to a special needs child that her father was terminally ill and had a short time to live. This was like a little further back in my career, and I realized, she probably had a profile of, maybe a 6-year-old. She was about 14, and realizing that we need to meet children where they're at in terms of their development, and that they can learn and make sense of the world as long as we are helping them to do so in a way that makes sense to them. So I guess my short answer is yes, they absolutely do grieve. That was my long answer. The short answer is they do grieve. And we just want to make sure we're being developmentally appropriate. In terms of the resources around special needs, that's something that perhaps, Ben, we can look into and get back to you for this individual, because I'm not sure about the resources I listed and what their capacity is around special needs. I'm sure it probably, it does exist, and they can look into that, but we can as well.
Great, thank you very much. There's a few other questions that kind of touch upon the same theme, which is, so I've just lost for 1 second, but so they're around supporting children who don't seem to be affected or don't seem to be expressing grief, and they're just curious around whether they should bring it up, whether they should let it be and wait for the child to kind of express something.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And Gerry, feel free to jump in at any time, because I know you have lots of expertise in this area. I get that question a lot, this idea that I'm not sure if they're grieving. I'm not sure if this is sort of normal. And I think the short answer is we all grieve very differently. Okay, so the fact that we're not seeing a child grieve in the way that we expect, or in a way that, we do, is normal and is okay. But it doesn't hurt to still be having an opening dialogues around this topic. We might not want to be intrusive about it and say, it's time we need to sit down and have a talk about this. But we also want to be able to be open and sort of capitalize on, natural moments that follow a child's lead and allow them to sort of be the drivers of the bus. This reminds me of a parent who I worked with at one of our schools, who very suddenly had her infant baby die at birth. Okay, and the older son, she was concerned that he wasn't grieving because he wasn't crying. He never cried about his baby sister. And I asked the mom, I said, okay, but what do you notice from him? What do you see, or what do you? She goes, well, he asks a lot of questions. I said, okay, and what does he ask about? And he was asking things like, is this baby going to come back? Is there going to be another baby that takes her place? This infant was cremated, so he was very curious about how that came to be. So sometimes we need to listen for what they are really curious about, or the ways in which they are expressing themselves. And just because a child's not, crying or be, distraught, it doesn't mean that they're not impacted, and it doesn't mean that they're not having questions and maybe even concerns. And there's ways that we can, be proactive. Again, if we have opportunities that come up, we can kind of probe, we can be gentle about it, but it is important to follow a child's lead. But maybe most importantly, how is this child functioning, right? How, is this child, functioning in a way that makes sense to the parents, or are they concerned about their behavior in terms of their ability to sort of go about their lives and engage in tasks that are typical to them? And if the answer is yes, and they seem to be doing okay, then I think for the most part, it sounds like a you know, a natural reaction to what they're having, but also know that that can change with time. I don't know if you mentioned, Ben, how old this child was or is.
In this instance, 5 years old.
Yeah, so, you know, at 5 years old, I'm not certain what this child's understanding of death is, you know, and as that changes and as they mature and they pass through these developmental stages, we might notice that, oh, it's resurfacing, you know, a year from now or 2 years from now, and it seems different and it looks different. And that's very typical and that's very normal because that is how children develop. And when they move through these stages, they're going to revisit these experiences in different ways.
If I could jump in here, I think you explain it so well about what we see when we are dealing with loss and grief. And I think what highlights what you're talking about is respect and being respectful of people, being respectful of a mother who is dying from cancer, of what her wishes are, of what she would want, and that's what her needs are, and little children, what their needs are. And sometimes, like, it's about what we would like. And most of the time, parents, like I read the question in the chat room about somebody's loss, and a little girl or little boy living with the aunt and uncle, and it doesn't appear that they're experiencing grief, and it's the desire of the adults, whether it's the teacher, the mother, the aunt, the uncle, to want to make sure that they're looking after their children. And I think it's important to address what the real issue is. So for an uncle to say, look, you know, this is what I'm thinking, and I want to make sure you're okay, and this is how I react. So if you have a culture where there is that dialogue, where you are, as you say, coming alongside people, children or adults, and being able to say in a way, this is what I'm thinking, this is how it affects me, this is what I can talk to you about, but I'm also here to listen to what you may want to share with me. And if we have that culture, if we have that sort of mindset, then there is a greater opportunity for kids to want to share and feel comfortable sharing. But just all of a sudden I have trouble when somebody calls me and says, I want you to see my child because their parent is dying or has died or they've experienced a loss. And it's like, it's not an automatic. Doesn't mean that there's some sort of a pathology that exists there. So like, let's give it some time and express your confidence in your ability to take care of your children and their ability to experience the loss, to readjust in a healthy way, to experience the various thoughts and emotions that they may be going through, and letting them know that there are people around who, when they hit a rough patch, if it's necessary, can be there and help them through it.
Thank you. There's a question here. The way I read it, it comes from a teacher or a principal. And it says that there's a student whose mother passed away from cancer last year, and he has special needs and is really grieving because he hasn't been able to go to the cemetery because the father is deeply grieving and not ready to go himself. As the anniversary approaches, the child's becoming angry and sad. How can I best help him? So this is a 9-year-old child. So is there a way that an adult in this child's life can kind of help them in an appropriate way?
Yeah, there is. You know, again, if this is, you know, a school member, you know, sometimes what kids need, again, I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, but it's for us to come alongside of them and just listen to them. You know, this boy, it's very understandable. He's lost his mother. It's coming on a year. This is still very fresh and very new and very real that he needs to adjust to. So coming alongside of him and just having somebody, you know, that he trusts within our school that can, you know, we're not, you know, rushing to fix things. This is a boy who sounds like he's very, very sad and with very good reason. maybe he just needs to have somebody who can acknowledge that this is really painful. Again, sometimes that response of, feeling uncertain, it translates into, I don't know what to do, and this is scary for me as an adult. And really, if we can just sort of take his lead and let him know that there are people there that he can talk to, special needs or not. These children can communicate and express themselves, and it sounds like he's doing a really good job of that. The other piece that I would highlight is the functioning of his dad. And maybe there's a way that this father might need that same kind of accompaniment right now. If we know that a parent's really struggling and with good reason, we might want to reach out and just check in, just let them know that we're here, and we know that the anniversary is approaching, and this is a very challenging time. And from that conversation, we're not calling to say, hey, you sound like you're in a really bad place and we need to get you some support. That might come out of a conversation, but again, it goes back to what Gerry was saying about being respectful, and sort of engaging with a person from where they are at. And letting them lead us as to what they think could be helpful in this time. And there is that link, as I said, the way in which a parent is functioning or not can have a big impact on the way a child is functioning or not. But it's not our place to sort of tell people what they need, or to quickly shoo them out, to others who can do the job. I think we are well placed in our schools and in our homes to be that person and to be those people. And I do think sometimes that's what people need. We're not fixers. We don't fix grief, but sometimes, and that's not what people are asking for. Sometimes they're just asking for us to sort of acknowledge their pain and acknowledge their suffering. And from that, we go from there.
Maybe it's also like the issue of developmental stages or disability. It makes me think of a couple of things. As one, that we need to offer suggestions at a developmental level that's appropriate for the child. Every child, regardless of what disability they have emotions and feelings, and how to address those emotions and feelings can be quite variable. And as adults, we know that sometimes, like having children, you say, well, what do you want? And it's like, I don't know. You get a shrug of the shoulders, and it's like, why are you asking me this? Or how do you feel? Well, I don't know, sad, bad. That we need to sometimes offer some suggestions. So, or tell kids what we're thinking. I'm thinking that it's the anniversary of your father's death. I'm wondering, like, how do you feel about it? Are you feeling sad, or are you feeling lonely? Maybe would you like to write a card? Would you like to do a drawing? Would you like to do something, or we can do something together? And how do you feel about that? Offer some suggestions. And also finally, that I think that as Janna was saying, that kids react differently, and they're very egocentric. So like I found, like for a lot of, we don't realize that a lot of kids who have disabilities, that the impact on caregivers on their lives can be quite substantial. It's mom knew what calmed them, or what their favorite meal was, or how to explain things, that like the impact on them may be of a different nature than it could be for an adult, how it impacts. And it's the loss of routines, the loss of a whole bunch of things, or even just that sense of safety, the parent who is there, who knows how to soothe somebody. So it's the experience of those that sort of disturbs their equilibrium, that we need to be conscious of. And it's sort of trying to understand what's above the surface. Like we see the behavior, or what we might see somebody being disconcerted by something. It's trying to understand at a deeper level how it might impact on a young person, and trying to offer support that way.
Thank you. Before we continue, I want to acknowledge that it's 8 o'clock now, which was the scheduled time for the webinar between 7 and 8. And I just want to thank the participants for showing up and being part of this webinar. I want to just thank quickly Janna and Gerry for their expertise and just a wonderful sharing on an important topic. I know, Janna, you mentioned you can stick around for another 10 or 15 minutes, but do you have any final words as we part this formal part?
I guess I just want to thank everyone for being here, and your presence, speaks volumes, really, and it reinforces in me the importance of this topic, and the importance for us to be having these conversations, with parents and amongst families, but also within our schools. You bring up lots of really important examples that are not easy to navigate. I don't want to imply at all that this is that what we're talking about tonight is easy or simple, but I do think it's doable. And I do think, again, that as parents, we are very well positioned to respond to our children and to know what not only our kids need, but what we need. So I really thank you for being here, and I hope to be able to continue this conversation in some fashion.
Great, thank you very much. So another question that I'm looking at that was asked previously, you mentioned, of course, the different developmental stages, the journey of loss for children and adults being different. This person is asking about the signs that my child could be struggling and what are the coping strategies. So maybe you touched on this already, but what are signs that children are struggling and maybe need professional support?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as Gerry alluded to earlier, sometimes we have this knee-jerk reaction because our children, loss is destabilizing and it's difficult and it's painful. And we really, as parents, I speak for myself, but I think I speak for all of us, no one wants to see our child in distress. No one wants to see our child overwhelmed. And I'm not suggesting that this is a knee-jerk reaction in terms of what this parent is describing, but just to hopefully have a sense of this sort of natural and typical way in which grief unfolds, that you are going to see times and moments of distress and of discomfort and of, fear and anxiety. I think a good indicator of when, this has gone beyond sort of what we call normative grief, and it becomes something that can become more complicated, because that exists, and that can be dependent on a whole lot of reasons. Our family structure, our coping styles, the nature in which a death or a loss has occurred. But I think a good gauge is how well our child is functioning overall. Can our child still enjoy life? Are they interested in the things that they typically have been interested in? Can you bring them to a place of calm and comfort? Are they able to be soothed? And if the answer is like, yeah, they're still doing that, then my hunch is to say that this seems like, a normative grief reaction. But when we have concerns that our child is really not themselves, that they're not able, we call it like the oscillation between our grief responses and our ability to be adaptive in our lives. Okay. I know, I'll give you an example. When my mother died relatively suddenly, this was extremely difficult, but I was still functional. I was still being able to take care of my children. I'm still able to sort of, after taking a bit of time off, return to my work. Was it hard? Absolutely. Was I preoccupied with this loss? 100%. Okay, but I was still functional amongst my, ocean of tears and my many phone calls and my, I know this, I'm talking about an adult reaction here, but trust in yourself to know your child. Okay, and if you are concerned for your child, if this concern just doesn't sit right for you, trust in your knowledge about your kids. You know your child better than anybody else on this planet. If you feel that that you and your child need additional support, then explore that, because you know best. But really, it kind of goes back to that ability to be functional and adaptive in their everyday lives within that range of sort of normative grief reactions.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge a comment in the chat, and maybe any thoughts you have around that. This person writes, another example of a living loss are children placed in foster care.
Oh yeah.
And I guess I'm wondering, I ask as a teacher, but any insight you have around how to support children who are placed in foster care and loss they might be feeling.
Well, that's a big question, and that's a good question. And I think first and foremost, making that connection, recognizing, first of all, recognizing that these living losses exist in many different forms. Okay. And when we stop and think about it, if we treat that loss as we do a death loss, and think about what we would do with a child who's had a significant death loss, can we look and come alongside them in that similar way? Because absolutely, any child who is living in foster care, these are oftentimes very traumatic experiences, and loss is by nature part of that experience. So, I'm assuming this is coming perhaps, Ben, is this coming from a school in terms of this question, do you think? Or maybe I'm not sure. Regardless.
I think just acknowledging that it's a type of living loss that many people live with.
Yeah, and I think just being mindful of that, it's not that we have to sort of poke at that bear per se, but if we are being consciously aware that this is a child's reality, then we're going to keep that in our minds, and we're going to be conscious of that. We're going to be, we're going to look for the signs and for ways in which we can provide support to this child, considering, what it is that they've lived and what they're continuing to live.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback on that a little bit, it really does highlight the need for us to tune into what children might be experiencing. That you can imagine that a child who has to be placed in foster care, that the emotional experiences that necessitated them, that it must be very challenging, and going forward it must be very challenging, and to be able to share with that child that your understanding, your concern for how that situation going into foster care requires a lot of adjustment on her part. And I think that grief is about readjustment, that most of us, and especially children, like stability, like things the way they are. And when something upsets their world, that they have to readjust. Same for adults. Right now, we're in a year's worth of readjusting and dealing with uncertainty, that it has consequences. And that sensitivity to children, being sensitive that these things are having impacts on them, and that we're here to, that we acknowledge it, I guess, is the first step. Like, this must be really hard for you. And then going forward to being there, to understanding and offering a lot of understanding that their behaviors, their interactions, their way of being, in part can be explained by their experiences, and to be there in a supportive role, and offering, like, kids don't necessarily, not all of them are verbal and will engage in that kind of talking about it. That's not necessarily how kids go about healing. And a lot of it has to do with just our attitudes. When we create an environment, like we talk about home, when we have a real home where we, or a classroom even, that's where kids feel safe and secure, that's a healing process. They don't have to talk about it. A lot of kids don't have to talk about it. They have to be in those positive healing environments like home is.
Well said, Gerry.
Thank you. So I think this might be our last question. I kind of, in parentheses, the child they're talking about elicits some anxiety when talking around death and loss. But the question is whether you have any age-appropriate book recommendations
Mm.
that they could recommend to a child. And I see that as, is there a book that can help open the door to having these types of conversations or appropriate conversations?
Mhm. There are a ton of books. There's so many, it's hard to sort of just name off, to name off a book. I'm not sure how old this child is, because there really is a slew of books that are really appropriate to various developmental stages. And I can send that along, Ben, if that's helpful. I have some really extensive lists of books that can be helpful. One that comes to mind is, When Dinosaurs Die. That's sort of a popular one that takes into account the various stages and processes that we go through. But, depending on the child's age, I would like to get back to you with that because I'm not going to give you a good list off the top of my head. But I want to say, aside from books, okay, like this idea of being able to sort of find ways to open this dialogue. Books are great because, obviously they're a gateway into having conversations and learning. But if I could just share a story that I'm experiencing right now with my almost 6-year-old. I mentioned briefly that she's in this stage now where she has this anxiety that's building around the notion, of death. And part of it is because of her age. She's learning that it's, as I mentioned, it's universal. We're all going to die one day. It's inevitable, and it's final. And you can imagine how that's really anxiety provoking. And again, as I'm preparing for this webinar, not tonight, but in the previous days, and I'm putting her to bed, and at bedtime, it gets a little bit more tricky because that's when we're feeling more vulnerable and maybe a little bit more scared, and it comes up again and she starts to cry, and I do my validating of it's normal to feel that way. And of course, these are big feelings and you're learning about this for the first time, and I understand it's scary. But she was clearly telling me that, like, you're not meeting the mark here, Ma. Like, I'm still scared and I need more from you. She wasn't saying that, but that's what I'm hearing. So I thought, my God, I'm about to give this webinar. What how do I do this? Like, I have this right in front of me. What am I supposed to do? And I realized I wanted to ask her, and I did ask her that, like those questions I said earlier that get to sort of more of that granularity about what's really behind the fear, or what are they specifically sort of anxious and fearful about. So when I said, Naya, because she's crying at this point, I said, what's scaring you? What's scaring you the most? And she said, even though I know you might die when you're really old, you're still probably going to die before me. And I thought, okay, I'm like, yeah. And I acknowledged that. And she said, and I'm scared that I'll be all alone. And I thought, okay, that's a little bit more granular, right? She's afraid that if I die, she's going to be all alone. And what a fear for a 5-year-old to have, and a logical fear. If your mom dies, you're going to be all alone. So I was able to say to her, I understand that you feel that way, but you know what? You're never going to be all alone. Even when I die one day, there are lots of people around you who love you and who care about you. And interestingly enough, that settled her, and her other fear, because she gave me 2 of them, was that when I die, she's just going to be sad all the time. And I thought, well, no kidding. If you think that when your mom dies, you're only going to be sad for a very long time, what an awful feeling. And I said, you know what? I appreciate that you said that, but I also want you to know that when someone special near you, close to you, dies, you will feel very sad. That's normal. But you won't only feel very sad. You'll also feel joy at times. You'll feel happiness. We don't just stay in our sadness all the time. There's ways that we still find joy in life. And I actually gave her an example of something funny that happened at my mother's funeral, and because she knows about my mother's death, and I'm open with her about that. And she said, well, weren't you sad all the time after Grandma Gillis died? And I said, oh, I was very sad, but I wasn't sad every moment of the day. In fact, I said, you know what, even at her funeral, something really funny happened. My husband's name is Jesse, and the funeral home wrote it Jessie, as you would spell a woman's name, and wrote daughter-in-law under his name tag. And I said, we laughed and laughed and laughed. And it was really funny, and we had a good chuckle about that. So I think just, again, I know that's a long story to tell in terms of this parent asking about book recommendations, but the books can open the door. Okay, but we can open the door too by sort of asking questions in a way that get to some of those specifics, and especially if a kid's feeling anxious, whether they're just thinking about these concepts and it makes them anxious, or they've experienced these concepts and it's making them anxious. There's ways that we can sort of tap into what that really means for
Great. That was a wonderful story. With that, I think this is an appropriate place to end. But I want to thank you. I want to thank Gerry very much for what is after hearing it, I realize what an important topic it is, and how nice it is to have a very open conversation around things that were often taboo and that we don't explore.
them.
So thank you very much. I see lots of thank yous in the chat for taking the time, the preparation, and your presence, if that's the right word.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for participating.
Have a good night, guys.